Okay, so we are 96A2, Amar Rabbi Lazar. The second column of 96A2. In the Gemara, we are 96A2. In the Gemara, we're about halfway down. It's 3 lines up from the where the lines get wide. Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says, Almana shetafsa metalton bimzono seha, ma shetafsa tafsa. If a widow grabbed metaltalin, so movable properties from her husband's estate, in regard to get mizonos, what she grabbed, she grabbed. So then she could use it to and sell it to buy for herself food, a little bit of clothes that we mentioned a couple prakim ago, what she's entitled to. And if she needs medical care, we said that medical care would come over here. So again, this is where she's widowed, but she's not claiming her ksuva. So if she doesn't claim her ksuva, the estate has to continue to provide her for food. And we mentioned last time, I think, that just like when the husband would give her food, if she had a job, the money went to her husband. So same thing here. If she would have a job, the her salary would go back to the estate in exchange for this support. So this is a little bit of of a of a chiddush because a couple of reasons. One is that uh metaltalin, nowadays we say the metaltalin are obligated for the ksuva itself. We said even from the shirt off your back. But for these mizonos, uh and also after someone's dead, you usually can't collect metaltalin from the estate. But Rebbe Lezer says you're allowed to she's allowed to collect from these metaltalin, from these movable properties. Tani nami hachi, we have a brisa like this. Amana shetafsa metaltalin mibizanosea, masha tafsa tafsa. If a woman was able to seize movable properties from the estate for her food, what she grabs, she could keep. V'chein ki yasser Rav Dimi, and also when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar Ma'isa b'chalaso shel Rav Shapsi, there was an incident with this daughter-in-law of Rav Shapsi that obviously she had her husband had died, Rav Shapsi's son. Shetafsa daskia maleas maos, that she grabbed some type of leather sack uh, full of coins, lahotzi miyada. And the Chachamim had no authority, no right, no halachic basis to take it out of her reach. Amar Ravina says, "Well, Amran Elul Mizoni." This halacha is only if she's trying to get for food. But if it's for to pay her ksuva, then we would take it back because the property would be there's a lien against his property, his real estate, but not for the mizonos. Maskifla, I think we turned the page here. Maskifla Marbaravashi asks, Ma'ishna liksuva de mimikarki v'lomitatli, mizonos nami mimikarki v'lomitatli. So Marbaravashi is asking a question on the entire din. Why did we say that for ksuva she's allowed to collect from real estate but not from movable properties, including coins? Mizonos nami mimikarki v'lomitatli. So the money for her food should only also come from real estate and not from movables. So el lemizone mad tafsa tafsi hachinami liksuva. So if we say that for her food, if she was able to grab money or movable properties for her food, she keeps it. So certainly if she grabs movable properties for the payment of her ksuva itself, she should be able to keep that money. But we don't say that. So why is this halacha work? Amar Relay Rav Yitzchak bar Naftali Ravina, but Rav Yitzchak said, Rav Yitzchak bar Naftali said, Ravina hachi amrina mishmei de Rava kivasach. It was said in the name of Rava like you that she does get to keep it. So Ravina on the third wide line in the Gemara, and it was the last three lines, last five lines on 96A2. Ravina said that there is a difference between Mazonos and Ksuva. Marbar Avashi tried to argue, but the Gemara says, Rav Yitzchak bar Naftali said to Ravina that Rava said like you. So we do allow her to seize property for Mazonos, but not in payment of her Ksuva. Now Tosos mentions important Machlokas Rishonim. When did she grab this money? Did she grab it while he was still alive, and therefore we say she'd be able to keep it, or are we talking about where she seized it after he died? So the first opinion in Tosfos, the Rivan, says that she seized the money after he died. So then Tosfos asks several questions about other cases where this wouldn't work after he died. So Tosfos gives basically an answer because she got it while he was alive, and there's a takanas based in that the estate has to feed her. Those two things combined will let her keep it. But a normal creditor, this wouldn't work. Though we saw some cases where it might work, but he has to say that this case of the mizonos of the ksuva is different than a regular case of a creditor. And then Tosos brings a second opinion that says that this is talking about when she seized it while he was still alive. Let me just find it in the Tosos here. The Rach and the Bahag. So the Bahag is called the Halachos Gedolos. He wrote a book called the Great Halachos, the Big Halachos. So because of that we call him the Bahag, the Baal, the author or the master of the Halachos Gedolos. And it happens to be that in his list of mitzvos, he argues on the Rambam the Rambam. He's before the Rambam, but he argues on the Rambam for several categories of mitzvos, not just for a couple here and a couple there, but he argues categorically on some of the mitzvos. I think he includes a mitzvah of Emunah, the way to count, let's say, karbanos, and Tum and Tara are much different. And the Ramban, when the Ramban asks on the Rambam and Sefer Mitzvos, the Ramban follows the attitude of the Bahag in many of those cases. If you learn Sefer Mitzvos of the Rambam, and the Ramban argues, the Ramban quotes the Bahag and follows the Bahag's ideas a lot. But Rabbeinu Hanan al Hilchos Gedolos says here we're talking about where she seized this money or these movables while he was still alive. So why does it only work for pay her mizonos but not for the ksuva? If she would be trying to claim her entire ksuva, why wouldn't that work? Because a ksuva can't be collected while he's still alive. So therefore, it wouldn't work for the payment of the ksuva itself. And then Tosos goes into a discussion: do we pass like Ravina or Marbar Avashi? And there seems to be Tosos seems to it's a little bit interesting. Tosos says that there's a principle that we pass like Marbar Avashi, except in two cases. And he says it seems that according to the Rach, the Rivan son the Chuvas Onim, not that we passing like Marbar Avashi except in two cases. It says we don't passing like Marbar Avashi except in two cases. So it's a big difference there. But the thing is, if we pass like Marbar Avashi except in those two cases, this isn't one of the cases of the two cases listed, the two exceptions. So there's a little bit of machlokas who shown him who we paskin like, and I believe the Shulchan Aruch paskins, or the Rambam paskins like Ravina. Check that up. That she is allowed to seize it in payment of the mizonos, but not in payment of the suva itself. So the Rambam paskins in the 18th chapter, Prachos Ishos Halacha Yud, a widow that seized movable properties in order that she should get sustenance from them, whether she grabbed it while he was alive, whether she got it after he died, even if she grabbed a block of gold, we cannot take it away from her. But the Beis Din will write that will like issue a receipt and keep a record that the amount that she has grabbed. And when they decide how much mazonos she gets, and they calculate with her, and she would get her sustenance, this food and stuff from that which she has seized until either she dies or until there's no more to get from that. And then the heirs will receive uh, the remaining. So the Rambam actually says, unlike Tosfos, says it doesn't matter if uh, she seized it while he was alive or not alive. And then in Halacha Yud Aleph, the Rambam says, and similarly, if she grabbed metaltalin for her ksuva while her husband was alive and he died, she can collect. But if she grabbed it after she died for her ksuva, she cannot collect it, even though the Gaonim said that a ksuva can be collected from metaltalin. So we mentioned this a few months ago that even though according to the Gemara, she can't receive the ksuva from movable properties, but there's a takanos gaonim that you can. Lefikach tazan aman mimatatan afri shel tafsa. So even though the gaonim says she can collect the ksuva and the conditions of the ksuva from metaltalin, therefore the widow can be receiving food from metaltalin even if she didn't grab it. So the Rambam seems to be, unless I'm misunderstanding something here, quite a bit different than Tosfos. So the Maggid Mishnah says it has to do with the Gemara Yerushalmi. That even though our Gemara is here, but there's a discussion in the Yerushalmi. Okay. Um. So back in the Gemara. Okay, so in the Gemara, it's the 5 lines up from the bottom, and on the article side 96A3, the bottom of the first column. I'm Rabbi Yochanan Mishmei de Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra. Rabbi Yochanan said the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra. Almana shashasa shtayim v'shalosh shanim v'lo tava mizonos ibda mizonos. If a widow waited 2 or 3 years and didn't ask for mizonos, she has lost her mizonos. She has lost her opportunity to be sustained from the estate for her ksuva. So the Gemara says, "Hashta shtaim irta shalosh mibaya." So the Gemara asks, "Well, why did Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra say that? If for 2 or 3 years, if she lost it after 2 years, why does it have to say that? If she was quiet for 3 years, if she lost it after 2 years, she certainly lost it after 3 years. So lo kasha, not a difficulty. Kan baniya, kan bashira. Here's for a poor woman, and here's for a rich woman. That if a poor woman didn't ask for 2 years, she loses her ksuva. But let's say a rich woman, she would have had more money, and so would have 3 years to ask for money from the estate for her mazonos before she would lose it. Inami, or another answer, kan beprutza kan betsnua. So this doesn't mean literally a prutza or a tsnua, but someone who prutza in this case means a much more outgoing person, maybe not as finely attuned to all the ideals of tznius. She's willing to go out and go to Beis Din and start demanding things. Whereas at Snua, so for her, because she's more of a go out and get it type of person, she would have 2 years to claim. And if she didn't claim after 2 years, she can no longer claim it. And but if it's a Snua, we see that she knows that, she doesn't want to be cause a fight and a confrontation and this and that. So 2 years isn't enough time for her to get up her nerve to go and ask for the mazonos. So she would have 3 years to ask for the mazonos. And if she didn't ask within 3 years, then she doesn't get it. Now, there is an important point to talk about here. No, so it's the next line in the Gemara. Amar Rava lo Amran Ela Mafreya. Rava says when they're talking about this, it doesn't mean that doesn't mean she loses it for the future. Meaning she can't say, please pay me back for the expenses I incurred for the previous 2 or 3 years. Aval haba yeshla. Even if she didn't ask for until 2 or 3 years later, from that point going forward, the estate would have to pay for her mizonos. But she only lost. It's like the statute of limitations or lahavdil, your flexible dollars card. You could use the previous year until March 30th, whatever the date is. So here too, if she didn't claim it for 2 years, she can't get reimbursed for the previous 2 years. But from now going forward, the estate will have to pay her. Okay. By Rabbi Yochanan asked, "Yisomim Amrim Nisanan over here, Merslon Natalti Amil Haviraya." If she's asking for mizonos, or the Yisomim say we gave her money for mizonos, and she's saying I didn't get anything, who has to bring a proof? Does she have to bring a proof that she didn't receive, or do they have to, or do the Yisomim have to bring proof that they did pay her? So Rashi points out that this is talking about. So there seems to be a machlokas Rashi and Tosos here. Rashi is saying that they're saying we paid for the following year. So let's say they said they come today and they say for the whole year 2025, we already gave her money for mizonos. So do we believe her? Do we believe them that they gave her and she has to prove that she didn't receive it? Uh, or do we believe her and they would and the Yisomim would have to pay her unless they could bring proof that they did already pay it out. However, Tosfos seems to say because we're talking about a case for last year. So if she would come now and say, I didn't get for 2024, would we believe her unless the kids could prove that the Yisomim prove that they did pay her for 2024? Or does she have to, or we will assume that she did get paid and when she comes and claim I didn't get paid for 2024, she has to bring us proof that, or reasoning that she didn't receive the money. So Toso says, because if she was quiet until now, it's kind of a sign that the Yisomim are being truthful. But Toso says if she's talking about next year's, certainly we would believe her that she didn't get paid for the upcoming year's support unless the Yisomim could actually prove that they did pay it to her. So it's a big machlokas between Rashi and many Rishonim, including Tosos, about what the case is. Are we talking about she's asking for 2025, which is what Rashi says, or are we talking about for last year for 2024, according to Tosos? Or another thing is, according to Tosos, it ends up that for 2025 there's no shaila that she deserves it unless she could be disproven. According to Rashi, that's what the Gemara is asking right now. So we turn the page. So do we say that since the property is in the chazaka of the Yisomim, so she would have to bring proof. So we assume that since the money was there, they would have paid it properly, and she has to bring a proof that she didn't get it. Or do we hold that the money has a chazaka that it's in her rishos, and therefore we could assume that she was paid for the mizonos until Vali Yisomim Lahaviraya, unless the Yisomim could bring proof that they did pay her. Tashma. So let's try to prove from the following brisa. The Tani Levi taught Almana calls Manchlani says if a woman has not yet remarried, al yisomim lahavi raya. The orphan, the yisomim have to prove that they have not paid her mizonos. And he says once she got married, and she's saying, so she got remarried, and she's saying, well, for the previous 6 months or the previous year, I didn't get paid, so I want to get reimbursed. Allah lahavi raya. It's upon her to prove that she didn't get paid. So it seems that the first halacha that Levi said is that we would believe her, and the Yisomim would have to pay reimburse her, according to Tosfos's understanding of the Shaila, unless the Yisomim can prove that they paid her. Amar of Shimi Bar Ashi Kitanoi. Rav Shimi Bar Ashi says, so it seems to be a good proof, but Rav Shimi Bar Ashi actually says there's a machlokas Tanoim about this fact. Who's believed in general? Do we assume that the woman did receive her mizonos, and she would have to, and we would say that she doesn't receive it unless she can prove that she didn't get it, or do we assume that she didn't prove it? No, I don't want to say it the wrong way. Well, let's just see the brisa. Macheres v'koseves, widow is allowed to sell fields from her husband's estate, and she writes, "Elu mizonos macharti. I sold these in order to get mizonos, food money for myself. The elu l'ksuva macharti, and if she sold it to pay her ksuva, in the document that she sells, or in a separate document, she wrote, I sold them in order to pay off my ksuva." Tiv Rabbi Yehuda. These are words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer Macheres v'koseves stop. Rabbi Yossi says she could sell the property, and she doesn't have to write that if it was for the ksuva or if it was just for mizonos. And because of this, she has a lot of power, because she didn't write that I sold it for mizonos or for ksuva. And we'll see in a few minutes how this gives her greater power or authority. So my labaha kamiflagi. So why don't we say that they're arguing about the following point? Rabbi Yehuda de Amar boy lefrushe savar nichse becheskes yasmi kami v'alaman lahaviraya. So why don't we say that according to the Tanakama, Rabbi Yehuda, she's allowed to sell it, but the reason she has to write if she sold it for the mizonos or for the ksuva is because the property is in the chazaka of the Yisomim, and therefore she has to prove that she received this money or not. So therefore she has to write it in the document why she sold it, for the mizonos or for the ksuva. Rabbi Yossi suffered, but Rabbi Yossi, who says she doesn't have to write the reason, lo boilafru, she doesn't have to explain what she's using the proceeds for, because the property is in her chazaka, that it's in her hands, and therefore it's on the Yisomim to bring a raya, to bring a proof that they actually did pay her. And she doesn't have to bring proof that she received it or not. So why don't we say that it's machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara doesn't like this. Why do you have to say it that's the explanation? Why don't we say that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi both hold that the property is in the chazaka of the widow, not the Yisomim? And they both agree that the Yisomim would have to bring raya that she didn't receive mizonos. If she's claiming mizonos, we would believe her until they could prove that they did pay her. The Rabbi Yehuda ate a tova kamashmalan. So why does Rabbi Yehuda, if we believe her, why does she have to give the reason? He's giving advice. It's good to keep good records. In order that they shouldn't say that she's Rav Tanusa is someone who's very hungry, that she's going through a lot of, she's high maintenance. ArtGirl says voracious because it's about having a big appetite, but it's not literally having a big appetite, but she's spending a lot of money on her mizonos. That's what it means. Because, so who cares if she's going through a lot? If she's high maintenance like that, no one's going to want to marry her. They wouldn't want to marry a lower maintenance person. So Rabbi Yossi should say Rabbi Yehuda says if she writes down I sold it for mizonos versus I sold it for ksuva, so then people will know that she's not so high maintenance in most of the cases. I mean, it could be there are cases that she is a higher maintenance. I'm saying that in air quotes. The ilote mahachi, And the reason I'm saying that the Gemara is saying that this is a better pshat, because if you don't explain it this way, Hadabai Rabbi Yochanan, there's a different shiloh that Rabbi Yochanan had asked, Tifshot Leimi Masnisin. Because our Gemara at the bottom of Tzadi Vav Amar Aleph said, Rabbi Yochanan asked, do we assume if she's claiming mizonos, and we saw that there's machlokas Rashi and Tosos, Rashi saying it's for the coming year, or Tosos saying it's for the previous year. But Rabbi Yochanan's question, why we have a different Mishnah later in our parak that Rabbi Yochanan could have brought a proof for it, and he didn't, because the Mishnah later on in our parak says, Macheres limzonos shelo b'veistin. The woman is allowed to sell part of her husband's field to get money for food for herself, even not with Basin, meaning she doesn't have to go to Basin and ask for permission. She's allowed to just put it on the market and sell it, or sell it without putting it on the market, but she doesn't have to tell Basin, I'm going to sell this field to my late husband because I need mizonos. She doesn't have to do this. And the Mishnah says that she writes in the bill of sale that the reason that I'm selling this field for my late husband in order to pay my mizonos. So if there's a machlokus between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, the way that the Rav Shimi Barashi wanted to say that it's machlokus if we assume she got paid or we don't assume she got paid, this Mishnah would only be according to Rabbi Yehuda. Because if this is a Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda, we would pass him like a Stam Mishnah. And Rabbi Yochanan definitely knew Mishnayos. He definitely knew all the Mishnayos. So he would have had an answer to his question. So why couldn't Rabbi Yochanan bring a proof from this Mishnah to answer his question? That clearly we believe the woman to get her mizonos unless the Yisomim could prove that they didn't pay her. The Eitzah Tova Kamashmalan, because the Stam Mishnah, which according to this would be according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, we have to say that it's talking about giving us good advice. Hachinami Eitzah Tova Kamashmalan. So too in the Brisa where there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, we could also say that it is giving good advice, but it's not because she's believed or not believed. So with this, the Gemara is saying it's not a machlokas tanaim if we believe her or not. Inami, or we could say dekuliyama nichse becheskes yasmi kaimi. We could say that everyone agrees. Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Yossi agree that the property is in the chazaka of the Yisomim, and unless she could prove that she didn't get paid, we would believe them. Dahainu time to Rabbi Yossi. So what's the reason that Rabbi Yossi says that she doesn't have to write down why she sold the field? Kirabai Kashisha is like the elder Abaye, and we had Abaye Kashisha a couple weeks ago. He said 2 weeks ago when we had him, he was one who said when the Gemara says that we're not allowed to seize property from the Yisomim, that includes adult Yisomim, not just minor Yisomim, but even adult Yisomim. But this is a different opinion of Abaye Kashisha. Damar Abaye Kashisha, because Abaye Kashisha said, Mashal Rabbi Yossi, what's a mashal? A parable of what Rabbi Yossi is saying. Lamad Avar Domer, what is it similar to? L'shchiv meira sha'amar, someone who's on his deathbed who said. So there's a halachos that certain things that a person said on a deathbed take place, even though if a regular person would say them, they wouldn't have halachic significance. I think we saw a week or two ago, in certain cases, people might say something, but if no kinyan took place, it's revocable. But if I think one opinion is that if a shchin meira says it, it's as if a kinyan took place, even though a literal giving the handkerchief didn't take place. But if a shchin meira says it, it's as if the kinyan took place. So if a shchin meira said, "Tnu masayim zuz l'ploni balchovi," give 200 zuz to Shmeral, who I took a loan from. Ratza b'chavonotlan, ratza b'tananotlan. The halacha is that if Shmerel to collect the 200 zuz, he could either collect them as payment for the loan, or he could take it as that the dying person was giving him a gift. Now, is this necessarily what we would think? I don't think so, because if he would say, if the dying man would have just said, give $200 to Shmerel, I might think it's a gift. But if he says, give $200 to Shmerel, my creditor, the reason he said Shmerel, my creditor, and not plain Shmerel, is because he wanted to pay back the loan. That's what I would have thought. But Rabbi Kashisha is saying no. And what's the difference between? So basically, it's a way of saying that he gets the 200, he gets 200, he gets 400. He's going to get 200 as a gift and an additional 200 in regard to paying off his loan. Tosos points out that depending on which one he gets first, it might apply. It might give him more money or not, because this gift is certainly not collectible from fields that had been sold. But his loan, if he has a star for it, because sometimes there's an oral loan, but if it was a written loan, he would be able to seize fields even if they had been sold in the meantime. So if there's some cash on hand, and the Shchiv Meira said, give 200 zuz to Shmerel, my creditor, it would make sense for him to take it as a gift first, because then he would still have the authority or the power to get the additional $200 from the loan from seized property that he had a lien against. But if he would take these $200 in payment of the loan, he would not be able, based on this gift of the Shchiv Meira, he wouldn't be able to collect that $200 from a field that had been sold by the dying person. So, because the Gemara continues on the next line, and if he takes the money as the gift, doesn't he have a lot of power, because he could still collect the loan from real estate even if that had been sold in the meantime. So Rabbi Yoso, similar to the case that the fact that he is recipient of a gift and the recipient of a field gives him more power to collect. If the almana had sold the husband's property and didn't write why she sold it, there's going to be some times where it's advantageous for her to claim that she sold it for mizonos, and sometimes it will be advantageous for her to say, I sold it as a ksuva. So for the payment of the ksuva. So even if she really had sold it for mizonos, there's going to be times where if she says if according to Rabbi Yossi she doesn't write it, there might be times where later she says, oh, I sold it for my ksuva, and she'll be in a better financial shape because of that. So that's what. So Rabbi Yossi isn't saying that she doesn't have to. So again, Rabbi Yehuda says when she sells, she has the authority to sell the field, but she has to write down why she's selling it, for the ksuba payment or just for mizonos payment. Rabbi Yossi says she could sell it. She doesn't have to say why. So why doesn't she have to say why? So the first reason we said that it's not a machlokas about believing her versus believing the Yisomim was because Rabbi Yehuda, the first Tana, could just be giving good advice. Now we're saying a reason why Rabbi Yossi said that you don't have to write it, because there's times that it's advantageous for her to say that she wrote it as mizonos. There's times that it's advantageous for her to say she wrote it as iksuva. So if she writes nothing, later on, she could have more power to say why she sold in the first case. So it's to put her in a better financial position. But in either way, we're not saying that there's no reason to say, like Rav Shimi Bar Ashi wanted to say, that the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi is saying who we would believe, the almana that she didn't get paid the mizonos, or the yisomim that they did pay the mizonos until she could prove that she did get paid. So Kates and Mocheres, how does she sell if she wants to sell a field in regard to pay for mizonos? What does she do? Amr of Daniel bar Rav Katina Amr Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Daniel. It seems for whatever reason we have some Amoraim. We don't have their names too often. Rav Shapsi we just had, and a Rabbi Daniel. Not a popular, not a common Amora name, but here we have these. Rav Daniel, the son of Bar Katina, Rav Huna says, "Macheres achas l'shneimos chodesh, lokech mefarnis achas l'shoshim yom." She. So it's important to remember that when you sell a field for in halacha, it's usually not a permanent sale because of Yovel. So even if you sell a field in most cases, there are exceptions for certain pieces of land that didn't deal with Yerusha, but for the most, you're usually selling it for up to a 50-year rights of land. I mean, sometimes we hear that in our times that they sold it for 99 years, but not in perpetuity. Like I think some nuns where they built that mall on Willow Road. I think when they sold it like 20 years ago, they sold it for 99 years. Whether it's because they didn't the church holds that they have to keep it forever, so this way the 99-year thing they didn't sell for. I don't remember the reasons, but normally in halacha, you sell it. It's not a sale forever because it's going to go back in Yovel. So when this almana is going to sell a field in order to give her get mizonos, Reb Daniel bar Rav Katina said the name of Rav Huna, it's like a 1-year lease sale. What we would call a 1-year lease, but it's a sale for 1 year. So she could sell it for 1 year. And the money is kind of put into a trust, and she gets a disbursement every 30 days. So let's say she sold the field for $1,200. So the buyer would disperse $100 for her every month. So for the 12 months of the year, she's going to get $1,200. Rav Yehuda Amar, but Rav Yehuda and Amora, not Rabbi Yehuda that we were just talking about, who's a Tana, but Rabbi Yehuda and Amora says Macheres l'shisha chadashim. She sells it once for 6 months, meaning it's like a 6-month lease, not a 12-month lease. But he agrees that the cash would be dispersed to her in 30-day portions. Tani Kavase de Rabbi Huna, there's a Brisa like Rav Huna, the first opinion that it's for 12 months. She sells it for a term of 12 months, and she gets a disbursement once every 30 days in order to pay for her food for the month. Tani Kavase de Rabbi Yehuda, there's also a Brisa that follows what Rabbi Yehuda said. She sells it for a term of 6 months, and she receives a disbursement towards paying for her food every 30 days. Amar Ameimar says, we paskin that she sells it for a term of 6 months, and she receives a disbursement every 30 days of the 6 months worth of money split into 30-day payments. So that's how Ameimar paskins. Amarle Ravashi Lameimar. Ravashi asked Ameimar, Rav Huna Mai. What about Rav Huna paskins 12 months? Why don't you paskin Rav Huna? So Ravashi, it seems, would have paskin like Rav Huna. So Amarle Ameimar said to Ravashi, Lo Shamiala Kalamar Lo Severely. He said, I didn't hear that opinion, but he meant I don't agree with it. So we passed in 6 months. So 12 months seems to make a certain amount of sense. Rashi says we could do it year by year. So a whole year's worth of mizonos could be guaranteed in one sale. Oh, so why is there a disbursement only for 30 days? So Rashi says because now that she's a widow, she's a free agent. She could get married again if she wants. So in case she gets married before the time is up, the buyer will give the money back to the estate and not to her. because even though she's not married now, but it's not so uncommon that she will be getting married. So therefore, we don't give her the money and then have to collect it back. It's just dispersed every 30 days, so that in case she does get married, it's easier for the buyer of the field for the 12-month term, but the 6-month term to pay the rest of the money back to the estate. So 6-month term seems to be a little bit strange, but I think maybe I'm wrong. But I think there's a certain logic to it, especially according to Rashi saying we assume she might get married, because there's a halacha in regard to a widower. If a man who lost his wife, there's a halacha that he can't get remarried until 3 regalim pass. So meaning there's a halacha that he has to remember his wife for a certain amount of time, and after a certain amount of time, he's allowed to get remarried. And the halacha is that it's 3 regalim. So Pesach, depending on when she died, Pesach Shavuos Sukkos, or Shavuos Sukkos Pesach, or Sukkos Pesach Shavuos, depending on which time of the year she died. And the Gemara in Moed Katan does say that if he had little kids, so he needs, so it's easier to get married, and that new wife could take care of the kids rather than trying to hire good help, because I guess that didn't really exist in the time of the Gemara. It mentioned a certain Amora gave kedushin to someone at the cemetery. He buried his wife, and right away he gave kedushin to another woman because he had very small kids at home, and he needed someone to take care of her. So even though that there wasn't 3 regalim yet, but there was a need for his kids to be taken care of. So it could be because of this cycle of the 3 regalim. For the most part, it could be that lahavdil, I think Tu B'Shvat, maybe I'm wrong, I don't remember, because also it changes. In Lakewood, when boys go to Lakewood, they're not allowed to start dating right away. They have to be a certain amount of time in Yeshiva before they're allowed. So I think if they start after Sukkot, they're not allowed to start dating until Tu B'Shvat, and they call it they're in the freezer until then. It's a mishigas, but I don't know the origins of it. It sounded crazy the first time I heard about it. But the point is that it could be that there's a 6-month period. Every 6 months, there's an increase in marriages, because not for first-time weddings, but if there would be a widower who would be more likely to marry a widow than to marry an almana. Though we know from Europe that in cases where a wife died, a lot of times he would marry a younger sister of the wife, if she wasn't even though you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister, that's what she's alive. So there's a lot of times in Europe, it was a common practice. If a woman died, many times the husband would marry the late wife's younger sister, who wasn't married. So it could be that every 6 months might correspond to, on the calendar, after Nisan and after Pesach, when after Pesach was, and after Tishrei, after Sukkot was, and the marriages took place then. Remember that the minhag not to get married during Sfira was not in the time of the Gemara. Even if Sfira happened to be the time that Rabbi Akiva's students died, well, no, the Beis Yosef mentions it, but it was certainly during the time of the Gemara. It seems that there was no problem. Well, there's certainly no problem to give the ring to make kedushin. There would only be a problem of the chuppah, and even when exactly that practice, took place, I'm not sure, but probably in the time of the Gemara. Well, but I'm just suggesting that it's taking too long to explain my thought here. But it could be that the 6 months, why we'd sell for 6 months, is because it's possible that after Sukkot and after Shavuot and after Pesach or after Shavuos, approximately every 6 months, there might have been an increase now that a widower has gone through 3 regalim after his wife died and he's able to remarry again. So now he might be available. There might be a man available who's willing and now able to marry this widow, and therefore she won't need a full year of mizonos. Half a year mizonos was going to be enough, because there's a likelihood that she's going to get married there's two times 6 months apart from each other when she might get married, and that's because when the husbands who have lost their wives are now able to remarry after 3 regal. That's a logic for the 6 months. But my name Rav Sheshes. Rav Shesha, they asked Rav Sheshes, so let's say a woman sold a field in order to get mazonos, and now we said there's a time that she could decide I don't need to be subsidized, receive my food from the estate anymore. I'm just going to claim my ksuva. So can she sell and then claim her ksuva, and then seize the field from the person she just sold the field to? Because the husband's fields are mortgaged for her ksuva. If she sold it from Mazonos, can she then turn around and say, I'm demanding my ksuva now, and then seize the field that she had just sold? So 97A2, Kamibai Lahubid Rav Yosef. They were asking about the halacha that Rav Yosef taught, the Rav Yosef, because Rav Yosef says, Armalta de a widow who sold her husband's field, Achrayas Ayasmi, there's a guarantee on the Yisomim. So if she sold a field and she gave a guarantee to the person she sold it to and said, even if my husband would have there would be a lien against his property from a prior loan, I guarantee you that if that creditor exists and he takes it from you, I'm going to make you whole again and we'll pay you back. Does she have to pay back? No, but the Yisomim would have to. So she's able, by giving this guarantee, it's something that the Yisomim are going to have to pay out, not her. Ubeidina dezabin, and if a Beis Din sold his property to pay for her mizonos, achrayas ayasme. Also, if they sold it with a guarantee, the guarantee is on the Yisomim that if the field gets seized by a prior creditor, the Yisomim from the estate are going to have to make this buyer whole again. So what's the halacha in regard to this case where she just sold the land and now she wants to seize that same piece of land back in order to pay her ksuva? Since the responsibility of this guarantee is on the Yisomim, is she allowed to give it back? Because the Yisomim are going to be paying her ksuva. So this is like a ksuva expense, which we know they have to pay. Odilma matze amrila, or can the buyer tell her, Nihida achrayas da amalo kabelta ilavach, since you didn't have regular guarantee against anyone, achrayas da nafshach milo kaboli kabelta, so but you're not giving me a guarantee that you yourself are going to seize it. It must be that the fact that you're selling it is in fact an agreement that you're not going to seize it back later. Because it's a pretty big breach of trust if she's selling it to you and then she's gonna, 2 months later seize it back and saying, "Oh, because I have a ksuva, I'm allowed to take it back." Well, then you sold it to me in bad faith. Is that a svara that we're allowed to use or not? So Amarle, Rav Sheshes answered, Tanisua, there's an answer to this in a brisa. She can sell additional pieces of property up until she reaches the limit of what her ksuva was worth. The samachla shetigba ksuvasa min asher. And the rest of the land up until she makes that amount of her ksuva, that the remaining land is going to be available for her to collect the ksuva, but she's not allowed to sell any more than the actual amount of her more the value of her ksuva. Shma mina shayara ein. Lo shira lo. So we can learn from this brisa that if there's more money left in the estate, or more land left in the estate, she can still collect her ksuva, but lo shaira lo. But if there's no real estate left in the estate, then she's not going to be able to receive her ksuva. So if she was allowed to seize the land that she had just sold, why can't she receive her ksuva from the land that she just sold? So it must be that this Bryce is telling us that if she sold the land for Mizonos, she is not allowed to seize that land back from the person she sold it to. That's the proof. So the Gemara wants to try to say it's not a proof. Maybe the Bryce is only giving her good advice. You're allowed to sell your late husband's fields for mizonos up until a certain point. Hadrinasa. So on the previous summit we have a line. We didn't want her to be a very hungry person, to be a high maintenance person. If she would sell it and then that, she would get a different not good moniker, someone who goes back on their words. A hadrinasa, someone who goes back on something. When we make a siyum, we say a hadrin. The hadrin's like, we're going to return to you, and we'll learn your masechta again. But here, if she sold it and then is going to seize it, that's not a good reputation to have. Lahavdil, Marty will, I think, appreciate this, and Jeff probably wouldn't, just because of you grew up not in the United States. There was someone when I was in high school, if we would play the game Risk, you'd make an alliance with them, and then the person's next term, they would go back on the alliance and then attack you. So that person, we learned not to make an alliance with him because the alliance was only good for one round of play. So same thing, if she's going to sell something and then go back on her word by seizing it, that's not someone you're going to want to do business with, right? You're getting a not good reputation as being someone who goes back on their word. So im kain, but if the Bryce is only giving us good advice, listen, the Gemara should say, she could collect the suva from the remaining my semachla. Why did it say that it is kind of like in a trust for her? Shma mina shiara in, lo shiara lo. To show that there's a trust shows that if there is leftover land, she could collect it, and if there is not leftover, she cannot collect it. But it does not have to do with just giving good advice. So let's try to finish till the Mishnah. You see there's a Mishnah about 7 lines down from the bottom here. Let's try to cover a few more lines. There was a question for the Zabin if a person sold land. So a person sold it because we know he needed the money he was going to make a certain investments. He wanted to buy a certain field that was available, or a certain merchandise became available. So we know that he sold it because he needed to raise cash quick in order to do this other business deal. But then, and then in the end, he didn't need it because the people who originally had this stuff up for sale, they decided not to sell that field that they had just put on the market, or that merchandise that they had. So we know he sold it for a specific reason, but now the reason for which he sold it doesn't exist anymore. Is he able to void the sale? Hadrizvini or lo hadrizvini? Can he void the sale? I mean, literally, hadrid, does it go back and be unsold or not? But in practical terms, can we void the sale or not? So I think we learned earlier, it was a long time ago, and Tosfos brings up this point. There's a halacha of Tanai. If you sell something on condition, then if the condition or the circumstance, you say, I'm selling it to you because, I want to. So in this case, would he have to say, Tosfos says that he would have to say, I'm selling it because I need cash because this certain specific business opportunity came up for me and I need cash. So then if the thing went through, even if you don't make a full Tanai, a full condition, but because you disclosed the reason for selling it, once we know that fell through, you wouldn't have sold it, so it would go back. Tosfos in Kedushin mentions a case, I don't remember where the Gemara is. Yeah, it's in the second parak of Kedushin, Daf Memtes. Someone sold all his property because he was going to move to Israel. Now, in those days, it's a big trip. You're not going to schlep a lot of stuff with you. You're going to convert as much as you can to liquid cash, or in those days, silver and gold. And then when he's going to go to Israel, he would buy new pots and new beds and this and that. So Tosfos there discusses because everyone know it's common knowledge when someone's going to make a big trip to Israel, everyone in the community knows. So in that case, would he have need and then something happened and the plans fell through and he couldn't move to Israel. He'll give the money back and the stuff he sold will go back to him or not? So Tosfos discusses in Kedushin. I don't remember if the Tosfos here talks about it, but do you need to explicitly say it, or is common knowledge enough? Tosfos here starts by saying he must have said, I'm selling. The whole shaila is because he said, I'm selling it because this other business opportunity came up. But if the reason that he needed the cash was a business opportunity, but he didn't tell anyone about it, and certainly not the buyer, there's no way that we would allow the sale to be voided. Does that make sense? So that the shaila here is, he said, I'm selling this because I need cash for a certain opportunity, and then the opportunity fell through, not by his fault because it got taken off the market, Rashi says. So would we allow the sale to be, is the sale voided in such a case or not? So Tashma, let's learn from a brisa. A certain person sold land to Rapapa, the Itzrachule Zuzi Lemizben Tori, because he needed money in order to buy oxen. So he needed to buy a tractor. So the way he would make money to buy the tractor was selling a piece of land. L'sof lo Itzrachule. In the end, he didn't need these oxen, or he didn't need the extra money to buy the oxen. V'adre neheli Rapapa la'ara, and Rapapa returned the land to him, meaning they undid the sale. So Gemara says you can't prove from there. There was no halachic requirement for a papa to return it, but Rav Papa acted beyond what halacha mandated. Lifnim mishur sedin, beyond what halacha mandated. So now we'll try to bring from a different proof. Tashma dahu betsorta dahav narda. So guess what happened here? Rashi says a betsorta is the sudden inflation. Yokar, things became more expensive for prices suddenly. In a modern day, we would call it a very sudden inflation happened. It's December, January, February of 2020 and 2021. They give all these refunds these money for COVID stimulus, and they're saying, oh, there's all these sudden temporary supply shocks. It ends up that it's an 11% inflation that happened. So sudden inflation happened in Naharda. Zabninu kuliyamala pa'apdainu. So everyone sold their palaces to get money to buy food because everything suddenly was so much more. L'sof asuchiti. Then it ended up that a new shipment of wheat came in. I don't know if Narda was near the sea, and a ship came in, but whatever. But more food came, and that alleviated the inflation. Once there's bigger supply, the supply will be able to meet the demand, and the price is going to stabilize. It may not be as cheap as it was before, but it's certainly not as bad. The inflation stopped. So what did the people we only know the reason they sold their big houses was because the food was so expensive. So now that the food price stabilized, can they undo the sales or not? Amar lahu Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, Dinahu dahadre apandulamarayu. So we have to let the palaces go back to the original owners. So we see that the whole reason we know that they sold it was because they needed to buy food because of the high price of the inflation. Once the inflation went away, they wouldn't have sold it. So let it go back, and obviously they'll return the money. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof either. Hasam Namni's Vini Betos have. That was a sale based on false pretenses. Because it was revealed that the ship that was bringing this thing was already coming in towards shore. So if they would have known about it, I don't know, I don't understand what Rashi's saying. Something happened with the river. I don't know if it's low tide, but because of the situation, the ship had to go zigzag in. And if they would know that the ship was close, it just had to zigzag in, they would have waited and not sold their houses. But if there was no nearby ships. So let's see, the article translated. It was later revealed that the ship bringing the wheat was standing in the eddies of the river at the time of the sales. That case is not comparable to our case where the seller wishes to recover his end because of development that occurred after the sale. Oh, so the river was too high, so they would have crashed if they would have tried to go straight in. So therefore, they had to go diagonally and zigzag, so that they wouldn't go lahavdil. I haven't done this when I was in high school, but I learned that when you ski, if you go straight down the hill, you're going to go very fast. If it's too steep for you, you just go zig and zag, so you don't go too fast. So lahavdil with the the current was too fast, so the boats had to zigzag so they wouldn't go too fast and then crash in. They didn't have tugboats to stop them. Yihachi, but if that's so that the sales were a mekachtos, it was based on a false pretense that the food not being there. Hainu damerli Rami bar Shmuel Rav Nachman. Then why did Rami bar Shmuel say to Rav Nachman, Im kain nimtzas machshin lasid lavo? Because Rav Nachman was the one who paskin that the sales would go back, and Rami bar Shmuel was critical of Rav Nachman, and he said, according to this, you're making them a stumbling block in the future. They're gonna think the halacha is different than it really is, because people might not buy anything because they might think that it's going to be reversible. So they're not going to risk buying something because they think it might get reversed. Amarle, so Rabbi Nachman answered, is there a huge inflation that happens all the time? Obviously, this was an unusual situation. Amarle, Rami bar Shmuel responded in B'Tars ben Arda Mishkach Shricha. But yeah, in the Harda, it does happen. These high inflations from a shortage of food does happen frequently. The hilchas and the halacha is zavin v'lo itzruch lezuze hadrus vini, and the halacha is if he sold it because he needed the cash for something, and then in the end up that he didn't need the money, the sale gets reversed, and it's or we might say the word voided, but hadre means it goes back, so the sale does get reversed. We got up to the Mishnah here.